Hello. So today I wanted to tell you about my personal experience with the priesthood. I find it very important to understand why the Mormon priesthood is not biblical, but that's not really what I want to talk about. I grew up just like most other Mormon kids with, faithful Mormon parents. I believed in the priesthood. I would ask my dad for father's blessings when I was having a hard time or if I was sick. I especially remember when I would get migraines every now and then, and I would ask him to give me a blessing because I couldn't get to sleep. And I think they worked more because it was comforting for my dad to be doing that for me than because the priesthood power was actually helping me get to sleep. When I was about 14 or 15, I started having some questions about the priesthood. I could not understand why all worthy male members who were old enough could own or use the priesthood, but women couldn't. I couldn't understand what was so significant about a lot of the things that the priesthood does that women could not do it. I couldn't understand why mothers couldn't give their children mother's blessings. I couldn't understand why women wouldn't be able to heal, especially if they were healing other women. I couldn't understand why women can't hold some of the higher callings in the church when there is at least 2 mentions of female prophets in the Old Testament that I can think of. I can think of Deborah off the top of my head right now, but there's of course never a female prophet in the Mormon Church, and they don't generally even acknowledge that women could have a prophecy. It seems pretty restricted to men who hold the priesthood. I could never understand that, why women were so restricted. The answer I kept getting was that for men, they had the priesthood, and for women, they had motherhood. Their glory and their power and their expectation and their responsibility in life was to produce and nurture and raise babies. I remember finding this answer a few times, and then a Mormon friend of mine reiterated it, and I remember feeling such despair, especially since at the time I did not want kids, certainly not kids my own. I thought at the time that if I had kids, I was going to adopt. And it also raised questions about what about women who are infertile, or women who are only able to have 1 or 2 kids before they are unable to conceive anymore, and what about people born without a clear gender? How many kids is enough? Is birth control okay if you're just supposed to keep producing kids because that's your responsibility? And why is motherhood so much more important than fatherhood? How is it equal with the priesthood but above fatherhood? Or if it's not above fatherhood, why do men get both the priesthood and fatherhood? And why do women only get motherhood? My questions finally stopped for the most part when I went to a youth fireside where they very carefully talked about the rituals, the endowments, and sealing in the temple. And one of the temple workers that was speaking mentioned that there are some rituals in the endowments that can only be done by women for women. Men aren't allowed to do it for the women. It's very gender specific and gender segregated. So for those specific things, it is the priesthood power for just those rituals are given to the women who work in the temple to perform those rituals. And I remember the women saying that it was a very sacred thing for women to have that power. And maybe that was very prideful of me for that, of all things, to quiet my doubts, but it did. and I pretty much stopped questioning that. I think it was too hard to question and doubt. So when I left the church and I looked into the priesthood, and I found that the Aaronic priesthood was only for sacrificing animals within one temple, not multiple temples, and that was what it was made for. And like the rest of the law, that priesthood was fulfilled and no longer needed when Jesus became the ultimate and final sacrifice, and that the Melchizedek priesthood is not an order that anyone can get into. Only Melchizedek, who is a foreshadow of Christ, a type of Christ, and Christ himself could hold it. And there's only ever one high priest at a time, and the only high priest is Jesus. We don't need any others. That was like, wow, to me. So then, of course, I wanted to know what the priesthood was for believers, if there was one, and if there wasn't, why not, and if there was, what it was. And I very quickly found the answer that most Protestants and evangelicals find, and that is that there is a universal priesthood of believers. It's talked about in 1 Peter chapter 2 and in Revelations chapter 1, where we are called a royal priesthood and a chosen people, and it's referring to believers. And it makes sense to me, because when you believe in Christ, you are filled with his Spirit, and you have him with you at all times. You have direct access to God. So the power of God, if you are being faithful and obedient and it is in line with his will, is accessible to you all the time. It may be in his time, in his way. It's still got to fit his plan, although that's really no different than what the Mormon priesthood claims with their blessings and healings and everything. But everyone has access to it. If you are a true believer, it doesn't matter your age, it doesn't matter your gender, it doesn't matter your race. We're all equal in Christ. There is no male or female, no slave nor free, no Jew or Gentile. We're all believers. We're all under Christ as believers, and we all have the same access to God and ability to have him work directly in our lives. The power of God. We all have that if we believe, truly. And that was absolutely amazing to me. And I just wish I had understood it sooner, because it is so much more powerful in my life. I know that I can lay my hands on my own children when I have them and bless them for healing when they're sick, even if my husband's gone, or if he's sleeping, or I can do it with him. I know that I have as much power from God as my husband does. Maybe we're meant to use it in different ways, maybe we have different gifts, but I have it too. And I don't have to depend on my husband's priesthood. I only have to depend on God, on Christ, and that's how it should be. Thank you for watching.